Okay, this is a screencast about reading primary research articles in biology. I think most of this goes for the sciences as well. So I'm going to outline one way to go about reading research papers. This isn't the only way, obviously. There are many ways you might go about doing it. And I've also linked in the comments below some other resources about reading primary literature. Okay, so you're going to have a paper. You're going to maybe print it, maybe you're going to download the PDF. Ideally, you've got it in some program where you can make annotations. Printing it out is great because you can write on it, you can underline, you can highlight. Okay, but you could also do it digitally. Okay, so you're going to have an article. Obviously, it's going to have a title. That would be the first thing to read. So we're reading this title. This is an article published in the journal Evolution. It's an open source article, so I'm not breaking any copyrights by putting it up here. Okay, and you can see that the article is titled Altitude and Life History Shape the Evolution of Heliconius Wings. So this is a type of butterfly. It's got wings. And this tells us that we're looking at some kind of study that where altitude and life history are the independent variables and evolution is the dependent variable. All right, so we're going to be looking forward to that. So just reading the title, we can get some idea about what the article is about. Right. The next thing you're likely, so you got authors, you can see where they're from. This might give you an idea about who the article is going to be targeted to. The next thing you'll be presented with is the abstract. So some people will suggest that you skip the abstract. Some people will say that this is kind of the most important overview. I have an intermediate position. I think that skipping the abstract can be reasonable advice. It's supposed to be a summary of everything that's in the paper, and it should be objective, but I think sometimes it can have some author bias, like what they think is the most important thing, or they're sort of telling you what you're supposed to get out of the article. So just like looking at art, you want to look at the art first rather than seeing what the artist is telling you should get out of it. So it's not bad to read the abstract first, but you might consider skipping it. If you read it first, you'll notice it's very dense. It should follow the same format as the rest of the paper: an introduction to the idea, description of the studies that they did, an objective reporting of what the results were, and then a description of the implications of those results, a discussion. So hopefully you'll see that order in the really dense paragraph. All right. Again, different strategies for reading a paper. I'm going to suggest a strategy if your goal is to understand the paper as a whole. So you want to understand the context of the questions, the actual questions that they ask, the specific data that they gather, and the implication of those questions. So you want to understand everything. It's possible that you're doing research and you're really only interested in one tiny aspect. And so you might just read only part of the results or something like that, or maybe you're just interested in the topic overall and all you read is the introduction. So there are certainly reasons to take a different approach. I'm suggesting an approach that you would use if you want to really understand the article in a holistic way, which would be what we would use for the assignment of the article summaries for this class. Okay, so the first thing then would be to read the introduction, and which sometimes it's labeled introduction, otherwise it's the first section. What the introduction is going to do is introduce you to the big picture, the context in which this study is situated, as well as leading you down to understanding the motivation for and any necessary background for the specific study that they did. So reading the introduction from start to finish should give you a good understanding of the scientific context that the study is in, which is going to then help you understand the implications of the results, what the results mean in a larger context. All right, so this you're reading start to finish. Pay attention to, oftentimes there'll be a section where they're saying like, there are 3 major factors involved in this phenomenon that we're talking about. And then they'll go first, and they'll tell you that one. Secondly, then they'll tell you the second one. And then third, they'll tell you the third one. So I like to put a little number, like a little number 1, and circle it by the first thing, and then second thing, and put a little 2, of course, and a 3 by the third thing. So this kind of, then when I'm going back to look over it, maybe we're discussing in class, maybe you're writing your article summary, I can go back and kind of look at those keys. Oh, here were 3 big, important foundational concepts. It also just helps me follow along. Since we're talking about annotating, be careful if you find that you're just kind of coloring over the whole thing. If everything is worth being highlighted, then nothing is worth being highlighted. So try to highlight just the very key, most important things. Okay, and again, the purpose that you're reading the article for might determine what things are most important to you. Okay, so you're reading the introduction. As you're reading the introduction, I want you to identify what is the big question. Now, not what is the specific experimental question, but what is the big context? What larger evolutionary question is this paper concerned with, or is this study concerned with? And so in this case, we are interested in evolution of butterfly wings and evolution of species, diversification among species in this genus Heliconius. Okay, so we're studying, what are we studying? The influence of altitude and life history on the evolution of these wings. Okay, so we've got some broad evolutionary phenomena. We're thinking about microevolution. Okay, and we're thinking about diversification within a genus. All right, so you're reading the introduction. You're understanding by the time you get to the end of the introduction, which is here, you're understanding the big context and hopefully also the hypotheses that they examine. And often this is happening. Here's the last paragraph of the introduction. Often in the last paragraph of the introduction, they concretely lay out their hypotheses or experimental questions, and here they're doing it. And so this will be a perfect opportunity to highlight number 1, highlight number 2, number 3. So this this is like a key section. You want to highlight this. If you're taking actual notes, you'd be writing these things down. These are the 3 big questions that the study aims to answer. So then as we look at the methods, we will ask what are the methods related to each of these 3 questions. As we look at the results, we'll ask the same, what are the results related to each of these 3 questions? Okay. Also in the introduction, you should get an idea of the overall approach. Like, what did they do to accomplish the research that they set out to do? Okay. So what's the overall approach generally? What are they going to do? This is something else you'd want to understand. I am suggesting then that you skim the methods section so that you're not reading this in great detail. That does not mean that the stuff in here is unimportant, but for the purpose that you're reading the articles for, right after you finish the introduction, going deep in the methods is probably not the next most interesting, useful thing to do. So skim the methods, particularly paying attention to the structure that they've already put in here. What are the headings? These are telling you what some of the most important things are doing. So study collection, this is telling you, they might also say a study system. So in this case, they're using a collection of specimens that have already been collected. So they didn't actually go out and collect them themselves, which is fine. Totally legit. All right, then they got the study collection. Then they measured them. Then most of the science that they did, like most of the work, was analyzing the data. And that's not always the case. Sometimes the first part of methods is most of the stuff, and the statistical analysis section is relatively small. In this case, most of the actual study was doing analyses. Okay, so don't let that frighten you. Again, for your first pass through the methods, you don't need to understand the background on any of these statistical tests. So we're skimming through. Okay, we've got a section on sexual dimorphism across species. If you didn't know what sexual dimorphism meant, you would look that up at this point. Right? Sexual, between the sexes, dimorphism, having males and females that look different from each other. Okay, so we know that they did some tests related to sexual dimorphism in these different species. Okay, we know that they did some tests about variation across species. So you'd probably skim this paragraph and see what traits are they talking about varying. And this figure gives you a clue. The area of the wing, the length of the wing, and the width of the wing. They're measuring these things and then asking how they vary among species. Scrolling on down, down, down. Variation within species. How variable is a species? Like, think about those histograms we talked about so far. Okay, and that's it. So these are the things they're looking at. So now we have a general idea about what they did in the study. Okay, so then section to dive into next is the results. And often there's going to be headers. So we just remembered that they did some analyses related to sexual dimorphism. So here are the results related to sexual dimorphism. They did some phylogenetic comparisons. And so here's the information about that. This is something we haven't talked about in class yet, phylogenetics. As you look at this first section on sexual dimorphism, you see that they're referencing a figure. You're reading through, right? They reference figures. So when the figures are referenced, you should go look at those figures. The adage is a picture is worth 1,000 words. A figure is worth at least 1,000 words. Okay, so oftentimes I think novice science readers sort of skip over the figures, but that's really where there's a lot of information. So figure 2 here, let's see what they've measured wing area, and these are the different species. If you didn't know that, you would look down here and they would be telling you that. Okay, and we've got male and female. It says male's gray, female's white. So we've got males and females for each species. Right, so then we can see that there's a lot of variation in some species. Some species are really variable. Some species, males and females, are really similar. Some species, they're really different. Okay, so we're getting an idea for what's going on, and we would be correlating this in our minds with what they're saying. So they're saying whatever result they're saying. Whereas 7 species had trends toward larger males. Okay, so then we go over here and we'd say which ones had larger males. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, so these have larger males. All right. They're also saying that there's some relationship between the extent of sexual dimorphism and the life history, whether the species are solitary or gregarious. You would know what those words meant because you read the introduction. Here we've got species where males are larger, species where females are larger, and you can see there's a relationship. Okay. So they're outlining all of this in the introduction. In the results. They're telling you about this, but you don't want to just sort of take their word for it. You want to actually look at the figures. And we're relating all of the results as we look at them back to the questions that they said that they're asking. Okay, so patterns across species and altitudes. We can look at those data here. Patterns within species and across altitudes. Here's some more data. So also they measured wing area and related it to altitude. Okay, so after you finished reading the results, you might go back and survey the methods. Is there anything that you left out? Is there anything in the results that doesn't make sense? Like you don't know how they generated those data. You're going to go back and look at the methods. You're going to take a moment to pause and ask yourself, do the results actually address the questions? And then what's the answer? How do the results play back into the questions? And then you will read, these are still results. The discussion. You're going to read the discussion. Wherever it starts, you're going to start reading it. And this is going to be similar to, here it is, discussion, similar to the introduction, but a reverse funnel. So they're going to take you from the study back out into the larger world. What are the implications of this study? So you're going to read the discussion and figure out those things. Then you might go back to the beginning and read the abstract and ask yourself, does what is described here line up with my understanding of the paper? Right? And then maybe you're done. Maybe you read it front to back one more time to get an overview. Right? So again, check out the links that are posted here for some more ideas about reading primary literature, and I look forward to seeing your review.